Okay, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقال رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أما بعد. So just a quick recap from last week. So Muhammad Sallam had ordered the Sahabi to dig a very big trench in Medina. And this was after the capture of the Banu Qurayza. All of the men were taken into a holding and they were arrested. The women and the children were taken into separate camps and were held captive. And the men, the Jewish men, the Banu Qurayza who were in the tent, they were very concerned and were very worried, not knowing what was going to happen to them. And amongst them was their leader of Banu Qurayza, who was Khaled bin Asad. And they said to Khaled bin Asad, what do you think will happen to us? And they were worried, they were panicking. As you can imagine, they've been captured now, Muhammad Sallam, and they knew that they had created and they had undergone a huge treachery against the Muslims. And no one was going to take this very, very lightly. So they said to Khaled bin Asad, what do you think is going to happen to us? And Khaled bin Asad, very angry, looked at them. He said, do you not hear the caller calling each and every one of you, and everyone that leaves this camp and goes outside? Do you ever see him return? You're all being executed. And you can just imagine the panic that came on their face. Khaled bin Asad was also called out, and he was one of the very last men that was being executed. When he was brought out, now remember, Khaled bin Asad was the leader of the Banu Qurayza who was quite reluctant to even break the deal with Muhammad Sallam. He only done it because he was coerced by Hudayr bin Akhtab, the Jew leader from the Banu al-Nadir. So when he came out, Muhammad Sallam looked at Khaled bin Asad and he said to him, Khaled, why didn't you take advice, strong advice from Ibn Qarash? Surely if you had heeded to his advice, we would not have been in this situation. Khaled bin Asad responded to Muhammad Sallam and he said, Muhammad, you're absolutely right. Because Ibn Qarash had told us that you were going to come. He did tell us that you were going to be the prophet. And he even had passed down through the generations that if any one of us would meet you, that we should pass our salams to you. Ibn Qarash was one of their rabbis from a very long time ago. And if you remember in the early stages of the Seerah, that I mentioned that before Muhammad was even born, that many of the Jews had come down to Medina in the anticipation of a prophet to arrive. And it was clearly written in all their scriptures. And so they used to pass this message down, hoping that, Muhammad would arrive, this prophet, this final prophet would arrive in their time. And when they wouldn't, and they would get old and they know they were dying, they will pass it on to the next generation, saying that if you see him, make sure you follow him. If you see him, give our salams to him. So this is what Muhammad was referring to when he was talking to Khaled bin Asad, that why didn't you heed to the advice of Ibn Qarash when he mentioned to you about me? And so Khaled bin Asad said, you are absolutely right. He did say that you were going to be here, and he did say that you were going to be the final prophet. But what could I do? Was I to be the man, the leader of my tribe, to follow you and then be disgraced by my own people, insulted by my own people because I left the religion of the Jews and followed them? He goes, if it wasn't for them, if it wasn't for these people, the Banu Qurayza, I would have, even now, I would become Muslim. But I can't do that because knowing that I would become Muslim, I can't have my people curse me. So therefore, I would die today on the religion of Judaism. And there Khaled bin Asad put his head forward and he was executed. In the process of the execution, there were some people that were spared. There was a young man by the name of Atiyah al-Qurayzi. Now, Atiyah al-Qurayzi, when he narrated this hadith, he was a grown up and he was a Muslim. At the time when this happened, he was a young man, he wouldn't even say he's a young man, he was a child. and he was spared. His life was spared. Look how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't allow him to be executed. And he said, the reason why they spared me is because I wasn't of a mature age, which is the proof to show that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not executing children. He was not touching them. This was for only male, sane adults. So he narrated this hadith that I was spared because of I didn't have that maturity. And eventually he became Muslim as well. There was also the hadith of there was also one woman that was executed, and this hadith was actually narrated by Hazrat Aisha, and she said that whilst we were in the camp and we were holding some of the women, there was one woman who was just hysterically, she was crazy, she was laughing and going mad, because it's almost like half panic and half insanity, and she understood what was going on. And I kept on saying to her, Hazrat Aisha kept saying to her, what's wrong with you? Why are you laughing? Why are you behaving in this manner? And then eventually the caller called out her name, and she started getting more hysterical. And Hazrat Aisha said to her, why are you being like this? He goes, don't you know they're calling me? And then she went out and she got executed. Later on, it was revealed, and the reason, she was the only female from the Banu Qurayza that was executed. And the reason why she was executed is because she murdered one of the Sahabi, Khaled bin Sufyan. Khaled bin Sufyan was one of the Ansari. And what happened was she went up to the fortress, high up in the fortress, and she pushed over a millstone over the edge, which landed and crushed him. And this is the why that she was executed. There was another hadith about one of the Muslim women by the name of Salma. Salma, what happened was, remember all these Sahabi and the people of the Ansar, they had very good relationship with these Jewish tribes in the past before Muhammad had come. One of the men of the Banu Qurayza, a man by the name of Rifah bin Shamwal. Rifah bin Shamwal took refuge in her house. He managed to escape and took refuge in her house. So Salma came to Muhammad sallam, and she said to Muhammad sallam, O Messenger of Allah, Rifah has taken refuge in my house, and I have good relationship with them, as in, like, we know their family, we grew up together. If permitting, I want to save him from the execution. And so Muhammad sallam gave her permission, and she came back and she said to Muhammad sallam that Rifah claims that he will pray and he will eat camel's meat, potentially that he will become Muslim. And so Muhammad sallam granted this wish. Now, what's interesting about this is that Muhammad sallam always fulfilled the vows that the Muslims had with the kuffar from a previous time before Islam was around. And you will see that if they had that and they owed them favor, or they asked Muhammad sallam for a favor, Muhammad sallam would permit this. One of the most famous stories in regards to this, how Muhammad sallam gave permission to the Sahabi to almost pay back their debts in terms of life and assistance to the Jews, or even to the Quraysh, was a story about Thabit bin Qais. Now, Thabit bin Qais was an Ansari, and in the Battle of Buath, and if we go back before Muhammad sallam came into Medina, the Battle of Buath was a huge battle that happened between the Aus and the Khazraj tribe, who were effectively now the Ansar. So before Islam came to them, there was 2 years of this huge battle, and it was one of the severest and the most horrendous battles that ever happened in the history of Medina. And both these groups, the Aus and Khazraj, were supported by the various tribes behind them. For example, the Aus tribe was supported by the Banu Qurayza. The Khazraj tribe was supported by the Banu Nadir tribe, and they would loan them weapons, they would loan them arsenals, so that they can have this fight and have this war with the other tribes. So during that battle, during this particular battle that occurred, there was a man by the name of Zubair bin Qurayza, who was one of the Banu Qurayza. Now, in the time of the Battle of Buath, what had actually happened, sorry, Zubair bin Bata, his name was. And what happened was in the Battle of Buath, he actually saved Thabit bin Qais. He took him under his protection. So Thabit remembered this. And one thing you'll find about this generation that existed, they were very honorable. They kept to their promises. They didn't break their agreements. This was a very big thing for them. Even if if these people were their enemies, they wanted to fulfill their vows, their payback, because they wanted to get this off their chest. So Thabit bin Qais, he noticed that Zubair bin Bata was captured. He was an old man. Zubair bin Bata was an old man. And he went over to him and he said to Zubair bin Bata, "Do you recognize me?" And Zubair said to him, "Of course I recognize you. How can an honorable man not recognize an honorable person like you?" He said, "You saved me in this Battle of Buath long time ago, and I want to owe this favor to you if I can help you." And he said, "Why? How can an honorable man like me not take a gift like this from you?" So Thabit bin Qais makes his way to Muhammad Sallam, and he mentions this to Muhammad Sallam that I have this oath and I've had this payback to this man, and I want you to give me the permission to release him. So Muhammad Sallam said, "No problem. Thabit bin Qais, if you owe him your life, then you can release him. At least then you don't have that burden that you owe this man anything." So Thabit bin Qais goes back to Zubair bin Bata, and he says to him, "I spoke to Muhammad Sallam and he has given you the permission to go." So when he was given this permission, he said, "But what of my children and what of my wife? What good will be my life to live if I don't have them around me?" So Thabit bin Qais went back to Muhammad Sallam and asked for his permission that if he could release his children and obviously his wife. And Muhammad Sallam said, "No problem, that's been accepted." So Thabit bin Qais goes back to Zubair and tells Zubair that Muhammad Sallam has permitted this. Then Zubair bin Bata says to him, "But what about my land? What about my house?" Meaning, what about my assets, my money? What good is there living if I don't have this? So Thabit bin Qais goes back to Muhammad Sallam and says to him, "Muhammad Sallam, what about his assets? Can we release his assets to him?" And so Muhammad said, "Fine, you can give this to him." So he goes back and he tells Zubair this. Zubair then looks at Thabit bin Qais and he says, "Tell me something. What's become of Harb bin Asad, who was our leader?" And Thabit tells him he has been killed. He's been executed. "Okay, what about our army leader, our vanguard, Azal bin Shamwal? What's his state?" And he said he has also been executed. "Then what about our two councils of Banu Qurayza, the Banu bin Qurayza and the Banu Amr bin Qurayza? What's happened to them?" And Thabit said they've all been executed. Zubair bin Bata took a moment and then he looked at Thabit and he said to him, "You have an obligation to me because I saved your life. There is virtually no point of me living on, even with my family, if all of my tribe people have gone, if they've been executed. So this obligation you own to me, I want you to execute me as well, because there is no good in life for me now that all my people have gone, and I want to join my loved ones." So Thabit bin Qais wanted to fulfill his vow and release the burden that he had in terms of payback. And so he executed this man, Zubair bin Bata. This news got back to Abu Bakr Siddiq. And Abu Bakr Siddiq, when he was told that this was, even though this man was given the opportunity to live, even with his family and assets were given back, and he didn't want to take that. He didn't even want the opportunity to live his life with the potential of even becoming Muslim. Abu Bakr Siddiq said to him, "Then good riddance to him, because he will enjoy his time with his loved ones in the pits of hell. He's not going anywhere else." Meaning this man should have taken the opportunity while it was there in front of him. When the booty was distributed, there was huge amounts of money. I'll give you an idea. When you're talking about swords and shields, something around between 1,000 to 2,000 of these shields. That's a huge amount of armory. Army doesn't last just in one battle. In their cases, a lot of these weapons, they lasted for generations. And to have 1,500 to 2,000 swords and shields for the Muslims, this is a huge amount of arsenal. This is like, I mean, this was brilliant. On top of that, there was huge amounts of property and wealth that was left behind that was all distributed. So what would normally happen is Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would take a fifth for him and his family, meaning for the state, for the people, for what is given to his family always in the distribution of the booty. For the men that had horses, they were given 3 shares, 2 shares to the horses and 1 share for the rider. So people used to ask me, why is that? And that is because if you go, it's like saying that, if you go on a journey and I'm taking my car and you guys are just riding, then at the end of the day, there's more risk for me. If my car breaks down, I have to pay for my repairs. I have to pay for the petrol, etc., etc. So when you go out to war and you take your horses, then when the booty is distributed, you as a soldier will take it 3 shares, 2 for your horse, because it's almost like maintenance for the horse or the camel. So this is how that money was distributed. And in the same notion, even though they found all this wealth and they distributed the wealth, and they also distributed the captures of the women and the children as well amongst the Muslims. And remember, the Muslims did not mistreat these people. And the next story will explain that. Muhammad Sallam took one of the women from the Banu Qurayza, a woman by the name of Rayhana. Now, Rayhana was a Jew, and Muhammad Sallam took her as her slave. Now, Muhammad Sallam had asked her, after keeping Rayhana for such a long time, he said to Rayhana that, why don't you become Muslim? And she refused. So Muhammad Sallam doesn't like keeping people in his household that are not Muslims. So he decided to give Rayhana away to somebody else in Medina, to one of the Muslims. But Rayhana refused this. She did not want to leave the household of Muhammad Sallam. So therefore she accepted to become Muslim. And this goes to show you how these people viewed Muhammad Sallam. They loved being under his protection, the way he treated the slaves. And technically speaking, they weren't considered as slaves under the same notion as the people previously when they used to keep slaves. Muhammad Sallam used to treat these slaves almost like they were part of his household, with equal rights, and not equal rights as in wealth and inheritance and nothing like that, but in terms of human rights, the equality was there. And she knew straight away that I'm not risking this. I have so much love and affection from his family, from his household, I will not go. Then Muhammad Sallam, when she became Muslim, then Muhammad Sallam asked her if she would marry him. And she refused to marry him. Now, there's different versions about this from the different scholars. Some say that eventually she did marry him and it wasn't 11 wives, he had more than 11 wives. But others say that no, she remained as a slave, as a Muslim, and he freed her, but she remained in his household. Nevertheless, we don't really know what the actual full details were in regards to that, but we know that Rayhana stayed with Muhammad Sallam in his household until the death of Muhammad Sallam. So this goes to show the way that Muhammad treated all of these people in the household. Now, coming back to the death of Sa'd bin Mu'adh. Now, Sa'd bin Mu'adh, remember that he was hit by the arrow by the Quraysh Hibar bin Arika, with that because obviously he had an armor that was very small, didn't fit him correctly, and so therefore when he went to the front line, then Arika shot an arrow which pierced through his arm and effectively blew an artery. And it was a death scenario for him. It was it was very, very dangerous, this injury that he received. And then we talked about how Sa'd bin Mu'adh had made a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that please preserve my life because of what happened with the Banu Qurayza. I want to live on and deal with them before you take my life. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved his life and miraculously kind of almost like temporarily healed that wound. So when the time came when the Banu Qurayza were arrested and they were kept, remember we talked about how the Aus wanted Muhammad Sallam to give them the opportunity to decide the fate of the Banu Qurayza. That's because the Aus had a very good relationship with them, and he wanted to make sure that they favored them. Now, Banu Qurayza were pushing for this. They wanted the Aus, the leaders of the Aus, to decide the fate of what was going to happen, because they felt in their heart that the Aus were going to be very favorable to them, meaning that they weren't going to die. They weren't going to execute them. They'll probably get a, probably 3-year, 4-year sentence, or they have to pay a huge amounts of blood money, or give up some of their goods, or even get, kicked out of Medina. But they didn't think that having the Aus make a decision for them was going to end up in their execution. And so the Aus asked and requested Muhammad that let us decide. So Muhammad said, fine, then Sa'd bin Mu'adh will be your leader and he will decide their fate. And they brought Sa'd bin Mu'adh back from the center of Medina, because he was in a makeshift hospital, healing up his wounds. So when he came up and they brought him up on a camel, then Sa'd bin Mu'adh asked the people of Aus that whatever decision I make will be the final decision, and they agreed. And he said to Muhammad, and he didn't even look at Muhammad, just out of respect, he looked down and he said, Ya Rasul, will you also agree what decision I make? And Muhammad, this is why I have given you the ability and the power to make that decision about what happens, and I will agree with you. And there Sa'd bin Mu'adh made the decision that they should all be executed, and the women and the children will be captured, and their goods will be distributed. And Muhammad said that whatever you said is the truth, and this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordained. This was the this was the hukm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. So obviously then when the execution occurred, then Sa'd bin Mu'adh went back to he went back to the Medina, back into the makeshift hospital, because he was severely ill and he was effectively on his deathbed. Muhammad sallallahu, Abu Bakr Siddiq and Khattab all came to see him, and they stayed with him, and they felt obviously very, trying to make dua for him, and they felt very upset the fact that he was in such a bad state. Muhammad sallallahu returned back home that night. Sa'd bin Mu'adh was in the makeshift hospital. And as Muhammad sallallahu that night, when he was in his house, Angel Jibreel came down to see Muhammad sallallahu, and again he was wearing this embroidered turban, and he came to Muhammad sallallahu, and he said to him, "O Muhammad, who is that man that just died, that caused the gates of heaven to open and the arsh, the throne of Allah, to shake?" Muhammad sallallahu panicked. He quickly got up, he put on his clothes, and he ran out of his house, running towards where Sa'd bin Mu'adh was. And his clothes were being dragged behind him. It was almost like he just quickly put it on and rushed. When he arrived to Sa'd bin Mu'adh, the hadith goes on to explain that Sa'd bin Mu'adh, he made a final dua to Allah, and he said to Allah, Ya Allah, if Muhammad sallallahu, the messenger of Allah, if there is no more war against the Quraysh, and remember Muhammad already had said that the Quraysh will never fight you again, but we will attack them. They will never dare to fight you again. Yeah, if this has all been done and I have fulfilled my purpose, then I beg of you, Allah, to give me martyrdom. The greatest gift that you can give any insan, give me martyrdom. And at that moment in time, Hazrat Aisha described the hadith, his wounds completely bursted. There was another hadith that quoted his chest exploded. And there was a makeshift hospital right next door to his, another tent, where there was a tribe in there, and they saw the blood coming from underneath the tent, and they were shouting out, "Hey man, what's going on? Where's this blood coming from?" And they hadn't realized that Sa'd bin Mu'adh died. And Muhammad sallallahu arrived there, and that's where Hazrat Aisha narrated that hadith, and she said, normally Muhammad sallallahu never cries for anyone. So he said, but if he was distressed emotionally for someone, what he would do, he would hold on to his bed, and that's exactly what he did. Sa'd bin Mu'adh had died as a martyr. He had made the ultimate sacrifice. He wanted to make that call, that judgment, asking the permission of Allah so that he can make that final, wouldn't even call it revenge, that final judgment because of the treachery of the Banu Qurayza, the tribe that had an excellent relationship with him, the tribe that he trusted, the tribe that he prayed and wished that would not let him down, and yet they let him down in the battle of the trenches, embarrassing him and turning against the Muslims. So Muhammad Sallam buried Sa'd bin Mu'adh. And as he buried Sa'd bin Mu'adh and they brought him down into the grave, Muhammad Sallam narrated that 70 angels who never ever stepped foot on the planet Earth were ordered by Allah to come down to attend his janazah. And Muhammad Sallam described that when they were at the when they were at the graveyard and the graveyard was dug, they lowered his body. And Muhammad Sallam was in the grave. You know how you go into a grave and somebody takes the body down as they lower it down? Whilst he was in that grave, the Sahabi narrated that they heard Muhammad Sallam say Subhanallah twice, and then they repeated after him Subhanallah. Then they heard Muhammad Sallam say Allahu Akbar twice, and then they repeated Allahu Akbar twice. Now remember, when Muhammad Sallam used to do all of these things, the Sahabi was in the mode of always constantly questioning, why did you do this? So we understand, so we can carry this practice on. So when Muhammad Sallam came out of the grave, they said to Muhammad Sallam, why did you say this? And he said, whenever we lower anyone into the grave has a natural reaction to constrain and squeeze the insan, because insan is a sinner. Every human being, every worshipper, whether every mukallaf, whether being kuffar, being a Muslim, every man is a sinner. And when you put him into the grave has a natural reaction to squeeze that insan. And whilst I was there, I made a dua for Sa'd bin Mu'adh, and immediately Allah widened his grave and gave him that mercy. Now there is a weak narration that was all, and which is interesting, because they asked Muhammad Sallam, and it's just something to think about, right? It's really the principle of this hadith, even though it was a very strange hadith, that they asked Muhammad Sallam, why did the grave try to squeeze Sa'd bin Mu'adh before you had requested for Allah to widen it? And he said, because when he used to make ablution, he used to make shortcuts in his ablution for urination. That was a little thing that he had done. So the grave wanted to squeeze him for that, and I made him dua. Now it's a strange hadith, but my point of this is, it's interesting how even the little things that we just take for granted, that we don't focus on these little things. And there could be things like, when you're walking down a street or you're at work, there could be another Muslim brother walking past you and he smiles at you, or he wanted to stop to have a chat with you and you were just in a bad mood and you didn't feel like talking to him, and so you just ignored him and walked off. Maybe that person wanted just your help for something. Maybe he was in distress. Maybe he didn't realize that his father died or his mother died or something happened, and he just wanted a smile from another Muslim brother or wanted a little bit of your time. Don't take for granted certain situations, and therefore always be cautious of what you do. And so that was, when I read that kind of scared me a little bit, that even for the little things, that's what Allah Ta'ala said in the Quran, that for every atom's weight of good that you have done, you will see on the day of judgment. But for every atom's weight of evil you have done, you will definitely see on the day of judgment. So this was a very beautiful hadith about how it kind of explains, that we should be very, very cautious about this. And so they explained even how Angel Jibreel, when he said that, this Angel Jibreel was talking about Sa'd bin Mu'adh, that the moment that he died, that the gates of heaven opened for him and the arsh shook. And the reason why they explain this, the scholars, they say, when they say the arsh shook, Muhammad said that the reason why it shook, because Allah had joy in him, that he was going to meet Sa'd bin Mu'adh. And the arsh never shook for anyone else. The throne of Allah never shook for anyone else. Such was the respect that Sa'd bin Mu'adh had, even in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When they carried his body, there was a narration even that when they were carrying his body to the grave, hypocrites were amongst them. Obviously, the nature of hypocrites is not to expose themselves to being hypocrites, but they would always make these comments. And so when they were carrying his body, they said, look at this. And they said out loud, Sa'd bin Mu'adh's body, his soul is so light. There's no weight to him. And that is probably because of the decision he made in regards to the Banu Qurayza, that he made the wrong decision. He should never allow them to be executed. And so later on, the Muslims, they came back to Muhammad Sallam and they said to Muhammad Sallam that this is what they had said about Sa'd bin Mu'adh whilst they were carrying him. And Muhammad Sallam said, no, they are wrong. The reason why his body was light is because the angels were carrying him. You saw the 4 or 5 people carrying his body, but underneath, those angels were carrying his weight. You were carrying nothing. This is like, I mean, just imagine this man. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends 70,000 of the malaika who've never come to the planet Earth before. They were given special orders that you go down and you're going for this purpose to bury this man. You're going to be at his janazah. Muhammad Sallam has so much love and respect for Sa'd bin Mu'adh that even later on, there was a particular battle that Muhammad Sallam was engaged in, where he sent the Muslims, where he fought the Uqaydir Dumam, which was a tribe. And they had sent Muhammad Sallam out of respect and out of peace treaty, a very beautiful jubba made of brocade, woven in silk. It was one of the best silk. It came from maybe from Persia or from maybe even as far as China. It was a beautiful robe that was made, and they gave this as a gift to Muhammad Sallam. Muhammad Sallam put this beautiful robe on, this jubba on top of his clothes, and he was in the masjid and he was standing at the minbar. And he stood there and he kept quiet and didn't do anything. And then he came off the minbar and he walked amongst the Sahabi, the Muslims that were there sitting. And as he walked past, the Sahabi were in awe of that robe. They have never seen anything like this. And naturally, when they're in awe of that robe, they wanted to touch and feel it. And they touched and they felt it. And they said amongst themselves, my God, look how beautiful this robe is. We've never felt anything like this. This material is out of this world. What is this material made of? We don't have anything in our country, in our land. And Muhammad Sallallahu said to them, are you impressed by this robe made of this pure silk? And the way, now remember, the hukum regarding wearing silk was not made haram by then, right? So if you're just thinking about that, silk was not made haram by then, the ruling hadn't come out. And he said to the Sahabi, to the Muslims that were there, they're all feeling it, because they were getting, look at this, feel this, and they all came round. He said, are you impressed by the feel of this material? He said, Sa'd bin Mu'adh's handkerchief that he uses effectively to blow his nose is 1,000,000 times better than this. This is how Allah is giving Sa'd bin Mu'adh that reward. Even his handkerchief is 1,000,000 times better than this quality. So such was the respect that Muhammad Sallallahu had for Sa'd bin Mu'adh, and such was the reward of Sa'd bin Mu'adh because of the sacrifices that he made for Islam. That how much commitment and really what he put on the line, what he had put on the line in terms of his ultimate sacrifice, which was his soul and his life. We now go on to after this whole event, after Sa'd bin Mu'adh had now been buried. Much later on, after the whole event of the Banu Qurayza had occurred, they've had time to think and understand who were the people that were really behind the treachery against the Muslims during the Battle of the Trenches. Now, the Aus and the Khazraj historically have always been in competition with each other. And this more so grew when they became Muslims under the leadership of Muhammad Sallam, except for their competition was a more healthy competition and not a competition of pride and trying to get one over each other for the sake of reputation and so forth. Now it was a case of the same kind of competition that even the Muhajirun had amongst themselves, like Abu Bakr Siddiq and Khattab. Khattab would always try to compete with Abu Bakr Siddiq, try to do more and better. So they would always try to impress Muhammad Sallam. And we know that the Khazraj, they were given the opportunity. They wanted to impress Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they wanted to do good. So when people like, when the Aus, when they asked Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that they wanted to kill Khaled bin al-Ashraf, they wanted to sacrifice him. They wanted to assassinate him because of the treachery he did to the Muslims. So the Aus tribe went to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, "Please give us the permission so that we can take him out, because we had a relationship with this Jewish tribe. We would do it." So the Aus now wanted to take the opportunity, and what they had found out, that there was a man by the name of Abu Rafi Salam bin Abu al-Huqaiq. Now Abu Rafi was he was a treacherous individual. His enmity against the Muslims was immense. He was one of the guys, one of the Jews that had worked along with Hudayr bin Akhtab in working with the various tribes to fight against Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Abu Rafi had gone to areas of Hijaz and really motivated some of the tribes to join the Quraysh to fight the Muslims. He wanted Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam dead. He wanted all the Muslims to be killed. Anyone that was loyal and anyone that was left over, he wanted to take control of them. So the Aus tribe said to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Give us the opportunity to take revenge. We will take him out. There's no doubt the treachery that this man has done, we have to take him out." And so Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave them the permission. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had sent 5 of the Aus to do this job. And who were they? So one of them, who the key person of this particular event, was Abdullah bin Atik. The other one was Abdullah bin Utbah, Abdullah bin Unais, and we will talk about Abdullah bin Unais in the next story, inshallah, as well, and Abu Qatada and Masud bin Sinan. So they went out. Now, Abu Rafi lived in Hijaz, so he was almost like in the same neighborhood of Medina, but he lived outside. And he was like a millionaire. He had a massive fortress. He had his people, his tribe living with him. So remember, they live in a fortress, which means it's surrounded by these walls, and they have a major gate. And the way you would live is almost like the medieval castles. So you have the castles, you have the people living in the castles, and then if you wanted to graze your animals, you take them out. If you want to go hunting, you go out, and when you're done for the day, in the evening, you come in, and the gatekeeper will lock the doors, and you stay in, and you're safe. So all these Sahabi, they went down there, and they went there by night. And so Abdullah bin Atik, he said to the other 4, he said, "You wait here, and I'm going to try and see if I can sneak in." They waited till it was dark, and the gatekeeper told the people, come inside, we're going to close the gates now." So Abdullah bin Atik, what he had done, very clever man, he pretended, he put a cloak on, and he pretended that he was relieving himself, like he was going to the toilet. And so when the gatekeeper saw him, he said, hurry up. When you're done, just get inside. Because when you try to rush someone in, you're not paying attention. The gatekeeper is not paying attention to the man who's trying to relieve himself. He just wants him inside quickly because they want to lock the doors. So once he pretended he had finished, he quickly ran inside, and the gatekeeper closed the doors and locked it with a key and hung it up on the peg. Now, Abdullah bin Atik said that I went into the stable where they kept the donkeys, and I hid there until everybody went into their homes. Then I came out, and I took the key, and I unlocked the gate because I wanted to make sure I had a quick escape. He said, I waited in the stable because Abu Rafi, in his fortress, in his castle, he was entertaining some guests. They were having drinks, they were having a laugh and a joke. He could hear them. He said, I waited until everyone had finished and the guest had left his house. When the guest had left, the lights went out. And remember, they have these candles. So you can see the candles and they reflect off the walls, and you can see them through the makeshift windows. He said the lights went out. So I went in. And what I did first, he goes, whichever houses I could see on the outside of his castle, he said, I locked them. I barricaded the people on the inside. While they were asleep, I barricaded them because whatever I was going to do, I wanted to make sure they could not get out and capture me. So I did as many as I could. Then I went into his castle. And every door I went through, every room I went through, I locked the door behind me. I shut the door. And I made my way up the staircase to where he slept, into this little compound that he was. He was in there, and I opened the door, and it was pitch black. There's no lights. There's no LED spotlights going on here. There's all lamps. Everything was blown out. And I shouted out his name because I wanted to know where he was. And he responded. I took my sword and I struck him hard. And he screamed out, and I quickly left the room, as if I was escaping. Clearly, I didn't do the job the first time. So I came back and I shouted out, and I changed the pitch of my voice, pretending I was somebody else. And I shouted out, Abu Rafi. And he said, somebody's in the house. And he attacked me. And when I heard this, I struck him again. But I didn't manage to kill him. And he screamed out again, and I ran. But this time he fell on the floor. So I came back again, and I changed the pitch of my voice, pretending I was somebody else. And I called out his name, Abu Rafi, are you okay? He said, there's a man here, and he tried to attack me. And then when I heard where he was laying on the floor. I walked over to him, and I took my sword, and I pressed it against his stomach, and I pushed it down until I could hear the crunch of his bones. And that's when I knew I killed him. I was certain I killed him, and then I escaped. And I ran down. Now, I tried to make my way very quickly down the stairs, but as I did this, I fell and I sprained my ankle, or the hadith described that he badly damaged his leg. So I quickly hobbled out, and I managed to get out and out of the gates where the other Sahabi were. And they said, what happened? He said, I'm certain I killed him. Go back to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and tell him of the news. But I will not leave until I'm certain that he is dead. So you lot hurry along. And so they left. And they ran back towards Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abdullah bin Atik waited until the people came running into the fortress, into the castle, and they found that Abu Rafi was there killed. His wife was screaming, and people had shouted, he is dead, he is dead, he is dead. And that's all that Abdullah bin Atik wanted to hear for a confirmation, because he had promised Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that they would go to kill him for the treachery that he had done. None of these Muslims wanted to fail Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even in the good, even in the spiritual aspect. Even in the small things of ibadat, they never wanted to fall short of what Muhammad commanded them to do. So he wanted to ensure that the job was done. And then they went back to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When he arrived back at the masjid where he met Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they told him of what had happened, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam noticed that his leg was damaged. And so he asked Abdullah bin Atik, lay down and stretch your leg out. And Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam made a dua, and he rubbed his hand over his leg. And Abdullah bin Atik said, the moment he'd done that, he said, my pain went and my leg was absolutely perfect. All night, my leg was hurting. It was throbbing. It was killing me, the pain. And yet he just made this one simple dua, and that was it. The pain had gone. Another event that occurred. Now remember that just because the Battle of the Trenches had occurred, and even though the Quraysh didn't have the audacity to now come back, their pride and their motivation had been hurt. And obviously now even what they had done to the Banu Qurayza, that didn't stop people from still trying to take out Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Remember, Hijaz and Najd, if you split Saudi, Najd is on the east and Hijaz is on the west. Remember, there's many, many, many tribes who still want to try their luck against Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because it's all about taking power and control. If you are a big power, if we can take you, then guess what? You're the kingpin of the Arabian Peninsula. The final story is the one that I've always wanted to talk about, that I did mention briefly a few weeks ago. There was another assassination that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had ordered. And this assassination was by a man by the name of Khaled bin Sufyan bin Hudayr. Khaled bin Sufyan, effectively. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sitting amongst the Sahabi, and he called on Abdullah bin Unais. And when he called upon Abdullah bin Unais, he said to him, I want you to go to an area of Uranah. There is a massive big force, approximately, it was narrated about 2,000 to 3,000 men. There is a massive force that is preparing to attack us. And they are led under the leadership of Khaled bin Sufyan. And he has gathered up all these many different tribes that had now come up to a number of about 2,000 to 3,000. And I want you to take him out. Now, the reason why Muhammad does this is because by taking out the person who is sponsoring this campaign against the Muslims, it weakens the resolve of the other tribe to try to attack the Muslims. Muhammad does not like warfare. He despises warfare. He doesn't like the death of people, and for no reason whatsoever. He has to do what was the minimum that was required to defuse a situation. And he knows in most cases, whenever these tribes try to get together, they want to just take him out. So he knows the best way to do this, take out the leader and the rest of them will stop, because he does not want to kill all these people, because he always believed in his heart, like he did with the other tribes, that eventually their children will become Muslims. He wanted to have that much mercy on them. So Abdullah bin Unais was given this duty. Abdullah bin Unais has never seen this man, Khaled bin Sufyan. So he says to Muhammad, O Messenger of Allah, how will I know who is Khaled bin Sufyan? I need to know my target. Muhammad responded to him. He said, Abdullah, when you see him, you're going to shake. You're going to tremble in fear. That's how you will know that's him. Now, Abdullah bin Unais, what I love about his character, his previous skill was he was a trained assassin. He knew how to take out people. So he didn't have this fear in him. And he went over to this area of Uranah, which is quite far out from Medina. And he walked into a camp of 2,000 to 3,000 men who were staunch enemies of the Muslims. And he narrated that as I walked in, I was trying to look around for who was Khaled bin Sufyan. He said, at that moment in time, I saw this man standing and I couldn't help it. And I started to shake and tremble. He said he was a huge man with scarring on his face. He scared the wits out of me, because I was thinking to myself, how am I going to take out this huge man? And so he wanted to go and, first of all, get himself acquainted with Khaled bin Sufyan before anyone asked questions who he was. So Abdullah bin Unais walks over to Khaled bin Sufyan, and he's with his people, mainly his wives and his children and some of his leaders. Khaled bin Sufyan said, who are you? He said, I'm a Bedouin, and I've heard that you've gathered an army and you wanted volunteers to join this army to fight against Muhammad and his men. And when I heard about this, I don't like Muhammad and I don't like those Muslims, and therefore I want to join into this army if you permit me. Khaled bin Sufyan said, more the merrier. Welcome, and settle yourself down somewhere with the men. Enjoy your food, get your gear ready, and when the time is right, we'll let you know. So Abdullah bin Unais goes back over to one of the tents and gets himself prepared. He knew that he had to take the right moment to kill Khaled bin Sufyan, where he was not surrounded by any of his men. He waited and he waited, and it came to effectively Zuhr had finished, and it was around about the Asr time. Abdullah bin Unais noticed that Khaled bin Sufyan was at the point where he was the most vulnerable. He was only surrounded by his wives and his children. So Abdullah bin Unais said, I got up and I focused onto my target and I started walking towards him. Whilst I was walking, I realized I hadn't prayed Asr. Look at that. This guy is in enemy territory. Brothers and sisters, we sometimes go to work on the train from here to Paddington, and Salah time is going. And we're more worried about all the non-Muslims sitting around us who are listening to their music, half asleep, snoring, eating their itsu sandwich, their Japanese food. And we think, I'm too scared to pray, because in case they may react. Abdullah bin Unais was in enemy territory where they want to kill a Muslim, they want to string a Muslim, they want to skin them alive. And my man is worried about the fact that he hasn't prayed Asr. He's got his target locked in, and he's been given a responsibility by Muhammad to do this job. So Abdullah bin Unais says, I realize I haven't prayed Asr. And I know that if I just stood there and started Allahu Akbar and started doing my sujood and doing my, my acts of prayer, they would know straight away he's a Muslim, and they would jump on me and kill me. They would stab arrows at me. They would chop my head off. So I did what I thought was right. And so I made my intention and I started to pray using my head as sujood and my eyelids. Yeah, so my head is ruku and my eyelids as sujood, until I completed my salah as I was walking towards Khaled bin Sufyan. The moment I got close to Khaled bin Sufyan, I finished my Asr prayer and I stabbed him. And he dropped. And I quickly took out my knife, cleaned it up, and walked straight back out, cool, calm, and collective, not drawing any attention to myself. And I went back to Muhammad Sallam, and all of his women folks, they ran screaming, and all the men came, what happened? And they didn't know who done it. And I walked out the camp, and they did not even detect me. I went back to Muhammad Sallam, and I went to see him. And my tribe people in Medina were with me. And I went in to see Muhammad Sallam. And Muhammad Sallam says, happy, I hope. And he responded, Unais said, I responded to Muhammad Sallam and said, yes, I killed him. And Muhammad said, yes, you spoke the truth. And Jibreel has informed me that you have done this. So then Muhammad Sallam, he got up and he went into his house and he walked back out and he presented me with a stick. He said, Unais, take this stick. Unais was happy. It's just a stick. He took the stick and he left. When he went back and he sat amongst his friends said, so what did Muhammad give you? He said, he gave me this stick. He goes, what's the stick for? He goes, I don't know, but Muhammad gave it to me. He said, go back and ask him why he gave you the stick. He said, okay. So he was not in the habit of questioning. When Muhammad gives him something, he just takes it. So Abdullah bin Unais goes back to Muhammad Sallam and he said to Muhammad Sallam, Ya Rasul, Messenger of Allah, do you mind if I ask you something? Why did you give me this stick? Muhammad Sallam sat him down and he said, the reason why I gave you this stick, he said, on the day of judgment, this stick will be assigned between yourself and me. On that day, there will be very few that will be able to lean on something that will save them on the day of judgment. And so Abdullah bin Unais realized that this stick, it has to go with him when he dies, and he will wake up on the day of judgment with this stick, and Muhammad Sallallahu will recognize him with the stick. And he said, when you lean on this stick, you're effectively leaning on me to save you on the day of judgment. So the story went on to say that Abdullah bin Unais, he kept this stick with him. He took this stick and he tied it with his sword. So all the battles and all the expeditions he went, it was always attached to his sword. None of these Sahabi would never leave their swords. That sword is basically their asset. And the story goes on to say that eventually when Abdullah bin Unais did die and they buried him, they took that stick and they wrapped him in his shroud with that. The stick was wrapped into the shroud with him, and he was buried into the grave with that stick, with the hope, inshallah, now on the day of judgment, when we will all be there, inshallah, we may see Abdullah bin Unais there standing there with his stick, and Muhammad Sallam will go there to rescue him on the day of judgment, as we have been given so many indications by Muhammad Sallam that if you do this and if you do this, very few people will be able to lean on something, and he has given us many things to lean on. Now it's up to us whether we take those things and we lean on those things that he has given us, so that inshallah we can be like Abdullah bin Unais, hoping and praying that on the day of judgment, on that day when people will sweat, people will cry, people will panic, and not even death can save them. They cannot die again. They have to stay alive now. That we will pray, inshallah, that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam will be there for us and he can intervene for us and say to Allah that despite all the sins that this believer has done, I ask Allah for you to forgive him and allow him to enter into paradise. May Allah Ta'ala grant this for us, inshallah. Okay, and that we be one of those like Abdullah bin Unais.